Welcome back to SleeplessRonin Plays. Today we're going to be doing another one of those fun tier maker ranking articles where I take a bunch of battle mechs and organize them into categories. Today we're going to be doing the 33 Inner Sphere Mechs from TRO 3058. I'm using the upgrade one to read because I honestly can't read my old original copy because it's in really bad condition. It is just falling apart. The covers are just so I'm going to use my newer upgrade one. To that end, though, I've got 5 categories today we're going to be sticking mechs in. They're a little bit different than normal, but only by a little bit. Our top category is Stellar. These are awesome mechs. These are wonderful, badass mechs. Above average. These are mechs that are pretty good. They are usually really good. Average. These are not good. These are not bad. They are average mechs. They're right there. You expect a mech that's pretty well balanced, but has a couple flaws they're going to fall into. Then we have Crap. That's the bad category. But we have a new category today, and that's called Does Not Belong. There are some designs in this book, which we'll get to, that honestly don't belong. They belong from an earlier technical readout. And that's right there in the category Does Not Belong. Everything in this book should be 3058 era tech. There are some mechs that do not belong in 3058. They're intro tech mechs. So they'll be going into that special category if it doesn't belong here. Let's start off with the RTX-10 Raptor. This is our first Inner Sphere Omni mech, weighing in at 25 tons. It's got a pretty good speed profile of 711.0. Some of the variants do mount jump jets, improving it. It does come in light on the armor, having only 56 points, which is under the average found for a Stinger or a Wasp in 3025. But, unlike those mechs, this thing mounts 11.5 tons of pod space, so essentially almost half of its weight is dedicated to weaponry. That's really good. That makes this thing a monster to fight for a little light mech. It has to rely on its speed in order to make sure it doesn't get hit and destroyed, because 1 or 2 shots will destroy this thing. It's not armored. It's not durable. But it's offensive. And to that end, there are some fun variants, like the one that mounts 3 LRM-5 racks. That makes it a pretty good long-range harasser. Or another version that mounts 5 ER medium lasers. That's pretty solid, and it has the heat capacity to handle all that as long as it only walks. So for several turns of running, you can build up some good heat, turn off one of ER medium, and you're going to be cooling down just fine. Another variant mounts triple MRM-10s, making it, if you got a good pilot in it, a pretty scary mech. All the variants in general are pretty good for this thing. This is a little Omni mech that, while it's lightly armored, it has the speed to survive. I'm going to put this as above average. The other fun thing about the Raptor is, if we look at the picture, it kind of resembles an AT-ST from Star Wars. And, that's kind of a bonus. Let's just, yay. Next up is the FNHK-9K Falcon Hawk. It's a slower mech. It's a 5.8, but it weighs 35 tons, so it's heavier. It's almost a medium. It's the upper end of the lights. 580 with 13 double heat sinks. This thing also mounts 7 full tons of ferrofibrous armor, so it's pretty well protected, which it needs because it doesn't have the pace to get the good defense values. It has an ERPPC, 2 medium pulse lasers, a small pulse laser, and then stupidly it has a medium laser in the back of the head. It's a light mech. Why do you have a medium laser in the rear? That makes no sense at all. Weapons in the rear are a waste of tonnage. But it's pretty, overall, you know what? I'm going to say this is a very average mech. If it was faster, it'd be a lot better. But it'd have to sacrifice something. Maybe if it lost a small pulse on the medium laser, it'd have the tonnage to upgrade that engine to go 6.9, which would make it a really good lethal little monster then. And it'd probably be better. And it wouldn't be wasting that ton in the rear, because it's a ton in the rear that is wasted. Okay, now we're on to the second Inner Sphere Omni mech, the OW1 Owens. This thing weighs 35 tons, and it carries only 7 tons of pod space, so less than our 25-ton Raptor. It has 7 tons of regular armor, so it's more protected than the Raptor, but it has that limited pod space. The reason why it has that limited pod space is because this thing has a bunch of fixed electronic weaponry. It has a tag, a C3 slave, and a Beagle active probe, all permanently built into all the versions of it, which is nice for an electronics machine. I mean, that makes it very useful for a C3 unit. And of course, C3 is awesome. See my video on C3. But that means it's not really a super combat mech. It's really going to fall into the role of scout or spotter, which is what it does pretty well. Because it's a scout or a spotter, I really think the Owens falls primarily as an average mech. I'm almost tempted to put it above average because the C3 Slave is a really wonderful piece of technology, but one piece alone just isn't good enough, I don't think, to really bring it up there. We go from one Omni to another Omni, our first of our medium Inner Sphere Omni mechs, the SR1-O Strider. Essentially, this thing is an Omni mech version of the Cicada. It's uglier than a Cicada, somehow. And it's only got a half a ton space more, pod space, than the Raptor. It is more well armored than the Raptor, thankfully. But it only moves at 6'9", so it's our slowest Omni so far. Which means it also didn't hit the speed of a Cicada, which is kind of sad. Maybe if it had an XL engine it would, but this thing doesn't have an XL engine, making it probably a cheaper Omni mech. Its loadouts aren't spectacular, and they're not terrible either. They're nothing to write home about. It's just kind of, it's an average mech. I really can't say it's crap, but it's not very good. It's not very bad either. It's an early Omni, and it's not special. At least three of the variants have C3 Slave, which is pretty solid. The 3 of the variants listed in the book have C3 Slave. Maybe more do as well. Next we come to the FS9-O Firestarter Omni mech. We're just hitting Omnis right now. We're like 80% Omnis out of the first 5 mechs. It's pretty funny. This thing also moves 6'9", but it has the added ability of jumping 6 spaces as well. It does mount an XL engine, and it weighs 45 tons. Its armor is a little bit better than the Strider beforehand, about a ton better. And it's, unfortunately, because it's a Firestarter, it has 2 fixed flamers, one in the rear. There's a great ton that goes nowhere. But it carries 12 double heat sinks. Hang on one second. You know what? We're knocking the Strider down. Why are we going to knock the Strider down? It has 10 single heat sinks. I'm sorry. It's a 3058. You're mounting singles like that with no good reason that's going to seriously limit your ability to put in proper weapons in the pod space? You're a piece of crap. The Strider, you're a piece of crap. I've reevaluated you. On the fly. Back to the Firestarter. Sorry for that interruption. The Firestarter mounts 12 double heat sinks. That's good. We're in the proper thing for 3058 technology. Any mech that doesn't have double heat sinks is something to stare at long and hard and go, what's wrong with you? Unless you're mounting raw ballistics only, what's wrong with you? It doesn't have the most awesome loadouts ever. I mean, the primary one mounts more flamers. Pair of large lasers, but more flamers. Yay, flamers. I mean, unless you're fighting a lot of infantry, they're not super wonderful. Or you're playing with the rules to light forests and stuff on fire. Then they're better. But it has okay variants. It has some ER PPC and LRM ones. It's got some ER laser ones. It's got some autocannon ones. It's overall not bad. This one I am going to rate as average because it does have the double heat sinks. It just doesn't have super inspired loadouts. It has 13.5 tons of pod space is, one of the reasons why. We keep going up in tonnage but only adding a little bit of pod space. Next up is yet another Inner Sphere Omni mech. This one is the BJ2-O Blackjack. Has 10 double heat sinks and it moves a 4.64 profile with 9.5 tons of standard armor, meaning this thing has 152 points of armor, putting it as well armored as the 3025 era 3 brothers, the Griffin, Wolverine, and Shadowhawk. This thing also only weighs 50 tons, so it's 5 tons less than those, and it's well armored. Now, it's not as fast because it's a 4.64, but what this thing lacks in speed, it makes up for in firepower. This has got some of the most gorgeous loadouts for an Inner Sphere Omni mech of all of them. Alt Config A mounts double LRM 20s, a medium and a small laser. It's essentially an archer for 20 tons less. That's good. That's really good. I mean, that thing is going to fire 12 turns of LRMs, and that's pretty much a good battle length, those 12 turns. So it's going to stick in for the battle, and it's going to do its job. That's very solid. Another variant mounts 2 LB-10Xs. That's a freaking rifleman right there. It's a rifleman that weighs 10 tons less. It's got some energy versions. It's got versions with Ultra ACs and medium lasers. It's got Ultra AC 10s paired with ER PPCs. It's got light Gauss rifles on some variants. No, this is a really good little mech. This is by far the best Omni we've seen so far, and I'm going to say this is a stellar battle mech. It's not fast, but it's well protected, and it has damage output. Good damage output. Next up, CLN 7V Chameleon. Chameleon. Sorry. This is, I love the story behind this mech. This is a trainer mech. This is one that I should put down in the does not belong category. But because the variant shown here is really just a trainer that's sold to industry houses so they can train their mech warriors, I'm not going to do that with it. Because a lot of the variants, the actual combat variants, use advanced tech. But the base variant is a 696 50-tonner with 10 single heat sinks, a really light armor factor, and all energy weapons aside from 2 machine guns. It carries a large, 2 mediums, 3 small lasers, and 2 machine guns. I mean, overall, it's not even a terrible mech for 3025 standards. So it's a pretty good trainer. And if you play with the mech quirks that come out of the Battle Mech manual and a few other places, this thing's actually pretty funny because it makes pilots that suck at piloting better pilots. I mean, just built in, it's so easy to pilot, it's hard to fail at piloting it. But because the variants are actually competent, I'm going to say it's not actually, does not belong. It has versions that have ER lasers, it has double heat sinks, it has XL engines in later variants. So this one, I'm going to be generous and say it's just an average mech, because that's what a trainer should be, is an average mech. But I'm not going to drop into the does not belong category because of the specific role it was designed for. I know it seems like I'm violating my own rules already, and maybe I am, but I feel like this one deserves a better place. Next up, the END-6Q Enfield. I love the name of this mech because I used to be a Civil War reenactor, and the old Enfield and Springfield rifles are pretty cool. So it's nice to see the Enfield rifle having a namesake in the Battletech universe. It's a 50-ton mech with 169 points of armor, or 11 tons of basic armor with case. This thing is carrying maximum armor for its tonnage. So it may have even wasted a few points because it went max. It mounts an LB-10X, a large pulse laser, 2 medium lasers, and a small laser. That's a pretty good weapons loadout with 11 double heat sinks. So it's pretty well heat efficient. It fights pretty well. It's got good defenses. It's 5.80, so it's not the fastest, but it's also not the slowest thing in the world. It's a pretty solid 50-tonner. It fits really well into the normal lineup of a lot of other Davian and Steiner mediums that move in that 4.6, 5.8 range with the ballistic and energy pairing. So it really fits in with like the Centurion and the Enforcer kind of like feel. So I like it. It's a solid mech. I mean, I'm going to say it's... Yeah, this is above average, I think, overall. I think it's above average. Just because it kind of hits all the boxes. It's got enough speed, it's got good armor, it's got good weaponry, it's heat efficient. You know, it's kind of check. It's pretty good. Next up is my personal favorite mech out of the entire technical readout, so I'm going to be biased towards this sucker, but this is the BSW X1 Bushwacker. I just love this mech. It's a 55-tonner, and I've always got a soft spot for 55-ton mechs. But it's just an eclectic, weird monster. This mech doesn't honestly make a lot of sense, but I love it anyways. It doesn't have quite the same full armor as the prior Enfield, but it's got a pretty good, pretty respectable 9 tons of ferrofibrous armor with case. It has 11 double heat sinks, which is pretty well enough to cover the ER large laser, 2 LRM-5s, AC-10, and machine guns that the base variant mounts. Other variants do change out weapons, including Ultra AC or LB-10Xs, and so forth and so on. And in general, it's a really nice mech. I mean, I love the way it looks. It's one of the reasons why I get this thing. It's super low. It's just cool. And of course, I have multiples of the new model from Catalyst, because why wouldn't I? And yeah, I just love this little mech. I'm not a huge fan of the artwork in the base book compared to the artwork from the new stuff. I mean, you can see the comparison on the screen. One is really awesome. One is kind of, what's happening here and where are my hips? I honestly can't tell how thick this thing is supposed to be in the original artwork. It's a little bit odd. Still, it is one of my favorite mechs of all in this whole book. So, as sad as it is, though, I think I can only really put this thing into the above-average category. I love to stick it in the stellar category, but it's just not quite there. I love the little mech, though. I'll pilot it any day of the week. Next up, we have the KW1 LH2 Lineholder. Remember I said there's some mechs that are going to fall into the why is this mech in this book category? Welcome to the very first one of those. We can sort of place the Lineholder before we even get to talking about it, because this mech doesn't belong in this book. This mech is bizarre. It has exactly 0 advanced technologies on it. No XL, no Indo, no Pharaoh, no doubles, no advanced weaponry, no case, no nothing that makes it stand out beyond a 3025 mech. This is just a glorified 55-ton 3025 mech. And I love 55-tonners. If this had been in the TRO 3025, I'd probably love this mech a lot more than I do. Because it's not bad, it's just not a 3058 era mech. It's a 5.8 speed machine, yay. It's got 14 single heat sinks, yay. Less efficient than 10 doubles, of course. This is where the issue comes, where this doesn't really belong in this book. Mounts an LRM-5, 4 medium lasers, and a large laser. Again, nothing advanced. That's not even a bad weapon loadout, although the LRM doesn't really... Why do you have the LRM on there? It's not super great. I think an SRM... Oh, it has two LRM-5s. Okay, it's a little bit better. That's better than one LRM-10 for tonnage-wise. Still, it is such a bizarre mech. It's cheap. I guess you can sell this like peripheries and militias. But still, it feels like it doesn't belong in this book. It is a 3025 era mech that's being produced 30 years too late. Now to the next Inner Sphere Omni mech, the BHKU-O Blackhawk Coo. I don't get the KU on there. Probably Karita. Why am I even saying that? Duh, of course it means Karita. This thing was developed by the DCMS. This is a heavy mech, unlike the Clanner version of it, which weighs less and is, monstrously overheating in the majority of it. This is a 5.85, 60-ton mech with 200 points of armor. So it's got good armor weight ratio on this thing. This thing is heavily armored, that's really solid. That means it's going to be durable, which is nice. It's got 17 tons of pod space, which isn't bad for a 60-ton. That's almost a third of the mech. And one of the reasons why that is because this thing actually mounts 14 fixed double heat sinks. And that means it can handle a pretty good heat loadout in a lot of its weapons. Its primary configuration mounts 4 medium pulse lasers and 6 medium lasers with a pair of smalls, and has a few additional double heat sinks to handle the heat. Yeah, this thing is pretty much heat efficient. Or really close to. I mean, you may have to turn on the smalls, and I got to do them just roughly in my head. So, that's pretty good. That means in some ways, while it's less offensively output and has much shorter range than the Clan Blackhawk, that unlike the Clan Blackhawk, this thing doesn't melt down when it fires all of its guns. Now, the alternate configuration A does bug me a little bit because it mounts 2 ERPPCs and 2 AMSs. Only can cool 28 points. If it didn't have those AMSs on there, it could have enough additional heat sinks to run and fire both ERPPCs at the same freaking time. And because the AMS generates heat, you can't predict your heat for the next turn either. Which means that this thing's going to have to take a turn where it just turns off an ERPPC to cool off and hope it cools everything down, because I don't like the AMS on this thing. It didn't need the AMS. There are some other variants that are kind of, okay. There's a Gauss Rifle one, which is fun to fire, but it's wasting a lot of tonnage then for heat sinks. There's the one that tries to copy the Clan primary variant, and that one I'm not a big fan of because it's exactly the Clan one. It just cooks too much heat. It mounts 12 ER medium lasers and only adds in 5 more double heat sinks. So it can cool off 38 points of heat. But the 12 ER mediums are generating 60 points of heat, so that's just way too much. Again, I mean, that's actually still more heat efficient than the Clan variant, but why? Honestly, if it only been 10 ER mediums and it had 7 additional double heat sinks, which it might not have been able to fit, that's a lot of critical hit spaces to deal with. It would have been a lot better. It would have been much more heat efficient, much closer to heat efficient. But whatever. they wanted to copy the clan loadout, and it just doesn't work as good as even the clan one. Because you're going to fire maybe a few more guns, but you're going to do still less damage. But where do we want to put that Blackhawk? I think that because of how well armored it is, and the fact that it is a brawler mech that needs to get up there, I think I'm going to put it above average. I mean, it really is pretty close to above average. It's just such a brick to kill. So, yeah, I'm going to stick it above average. Because it is a 5.85 also, and it's got a good movement profile. So I think I'm going to put it above average for the Inner Sphere. It's really trying pretty darn hard. Now we come to yet another mech that I go, you're in the wrong book. This is the MLN 1A Merlin, which looks like someone took a normally tall mech and squished the torso down. It also has some other artistic things. I hate to rag on the art in any of these books, but this one just utterly actually a lot of the art in this book confuses me in many ways, but this one just really confuses me. I mean, it has an LRM-5 rack that is represented by 6 missile tubes drawn on the torso. It has a machine gun that's nearly as big as the PPC. Its medium laser barrels are bigger than the PPC. What is going on with the art style? That makes zero sense to me. Whatever. Anyways, this is another mech that doesn't have any advanced technology in 3058. It's got 18 single heat sinks. Oh, that's great. It's got a 464 movement profile and a 60-ton chassis with less armor than the Blackhawk KU. This thing only mounts 10.5 tons of armor. It carries a PPC, 2 mediums, an LRM-5, and a machine gun. I mean, it's got less effective weaponry than even the Lineholder, in my opinion. So, it's got junk weaponry. No heats. I mean, it can handle all the weaponry heat more. It can handle all the weaponry heat, except for unless you fire the flamer that it's got. But it can handle weaponry heat, but it's just not very good. I mean, this thing is actually even mentioned as being coming off the line in 3010. So, like, yeah, it's one of those designs that belonged in 3025 but didn't exist then. So this is it does not belong in this book design. They should just like save these designs for a technical readout called, 3010 or whatever, like, Fourth Succession War Part Beta, I don't know, off the top of my head, whatever. Or Before the War, blah, 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 blah. Because, yeah, it doesn't belong in this book. It is a mech from a previous era. Next, the AV-1-O Avatar. This is our 70-ton Inner Sphere Omni mech, which is kind of funny. It's got 10 double heat sinks and 12 tons of armor with case built into it. But the funny thing about this mech is it's an Omni mech that has 2 fixed forward-mounted center torso medium lasers. The fluff behind it was they couldn't actually swap those out without causing issues, so they had to like permanently build them in so they wouldn't have like problems. So it always has 2 medium lasers in the front, and they also stick out like 4 meters in front of the mech or something like that, or like a meter in front of the mech or something like that. They're really, really exaggerated. Nonetheless, this thing very obviously is attempting to copy the clan Mad Dog / Vulture, which weighs in at 10 tons less. Again, clan mechs weigh less, do more. But I like this mech overall because I like the Vulture. I like this one too. This base variant mounts an LB-10X, 2 LRM-10s, 2 medium pulse lasers, and a pair of machine guns in addition to the built-in medium lasers, so it's pretty good. It's got... all the variants are pretty solid. The thing AC-20 with ER larges and SRMs, multiple LRM rack one that mounts ACs and LRMs and PPCs, light Gauss rifle variants, ER PPCs and LB-20 variants. It even has a C3 master computer in one variant, which is really darn solid. I can't fault that. C3 master computers are wonderful, and they don't appear on a huge number of mechs. So having a nice 70-ton Omni mech with a C3 master computer is really great. Another one two of them mount C3 slaves. Or no, one of them has a C3I computer. So that's obviously a Word of Blake variant. I mean, this thing was... That's interesting. Word of Blake variant. Oh, okay. Still, but yeah, obviously that one's a Word of Blake variant. C3I is a Word of Blake technology. Then we got a C3 slave variant. We got a C3 master variant. Yeah, I like that overall. I'm going to say that this thing falls into the above average category, because it does have a few issues with like overheating and stuff like that, because a lot of the variants don't actually increase the number of heat sinks beyond those 10 doubles that are fixed. Next, we come to the first of the 2 frog mechs, I like to call them, in this book. The first up of the mechs is the DGR-3F Dragonfire. This is a 75-ton Inner Sphere 4/6 mech with 10 double heat sinks and 14.5 tons of armor. And it mounts an LB-10X, a Gauss rifle, a large laser, and 2 medium pulse lasers, all with an Guardian ECM suite sitting around on it, so that's pretty darn good also. And in general, this thing is really heavily armored. In fact, as I'm glancing down the armor values, it is maximum armored, so that's really sweet. It's got good weaponry, Gauss rifles, LBXs, and large lasers all pair together pretty well. And it's, got good enough speed. It's a 4/6 at 75 tons. It's a really solid mech. In fact, I think I'm going to say this is a stellar mech. I don't see anything wrong with this mech at all. It's heat efficient. Like pretty much on the button nearly. And that's really darn good. I think you might go up movement heat only. Oh no, you can handle that a few times. And that's if you're firing the medium pulses, which means within 6 hexes. So if you're not firing the medium pulses, you're going to be running heat efficient all day long. Our second frog mech is the MTR 5K Maelstrom. This one is the all-energy version, in many ways, in my opinion, of the prior mech. It is also faster moving into 5.8, and it has 19 double heat sinks built in. Also with 14.5 tons of maximal armor. This thing carries an ER PPC, an ER large laser, a tag, and 2 medium pulses, and a small laser. So it's a little bit less damaging, but it's also faster. And, once again, this thing is pretty darn near heat efficient. We do that 15 plus 12, we got 27, plus 8 more. Gives us 35 with a small, 36, and running is 38 heat. This thing will never generate any extra points of heat. That's good. It's all energy, so you're never going to run out of ammo. Nothing's going to explode on you. All you got to worry about is having those side torsos breached and losing an XL engine. Yeah. Hello, frog mechs. Both of you are up here, up in the hop top. They're both stellar designs. Really good. 75-tonners are pretty solid in this book. Now we come to a mech that I just can't make myself like. The O-Bakemono. The OBK M10 O-Bakemono. I'm just not a huge fan of Aero 4 in general. I mean, I don't mind artillery in the game, but I usually tend to... I don't know. It's just not as fun to me. I can't explain it that much. It's just not super fun in my opinion. And this thing mounts 2 Aero 4 systems with 15 shots of ammo per launcher, 2 medium lasers, and a small laser. It's not as well armored as our prior 75-tonners, and it moves at 4/6. It's got 10 double heat sinks, which is good. And, I understand the reasoning for this mech. It's nice to have an artillery piece in places, and it gives those mechs that have tag a reason for being, unless, of course, you're using semi-guided LRMs. Use semi-guided LRMs. They're fun. I don't know. I'm going to have to put this thing as average because of my personal bias towards it. I'm just not a big fan of playing with artillery. Next up is the LB-7Q Longbow. Have we talked about the Longbow before? Sorry, we had to, like the 2750 book. Which is why this doesn't feel like this belongs here. This thing has no advanced tech on it again. It has a 3.5 profile for movement. It's an 85-ton assault mech. It has 22 single heat sinks. It has 2 LRM-20s, 2 LRM-5s, and a medium laser. Nothing special, nothing standouts. No Indo-Steel, no ferrofibrous. Now, the variants are going to be definitely talking about tech upgrades, but this mech, I'm sorry. Next up is the Assault Inner Sphere Omni mech, the SD-1-O Sunder. I've always thought this thing should be called a Sunderer. Something that sunders, not just Sunder. But that's me. This is a nice mech. It has 15 double heat sinks built into it on a 4.6 chassis on a 90-ton mech. Okay, it's got 264 points of armor, or 16.5 tons of armor, and it has 36 tons of pod space available. This thing's got some pretty good variants. None of them are going to be super standout until you get down to the C3 Master one, which has two C3 Master computers on it. That means it can control a lot of mechs. You can control 3 other Masters off this thing and essentially make a massive C3 unit. This thing is battlefield command level like unit. That is just awesome. Which is what this thing really shines at. And the fun thing is, you can have other Sunders in that same unit because they have a version that mounts the slave system. So you've got your leader, you've got your command mech and your follower mechs built in to this one chassis. This thing is pretty awesome for that reason. And it has some variants that mount ERPPCs and Gauss rifles. It's got long range support variants. It's got AC-20 variants. It's got LB-20 variants. It's got multi-PPC variants. Overall, it's pretty good. The Sunder is... I am so close to taking it stellar because of the C3 Master computer, but it really just falls in the above average category for me overall. For one thing, it's kind of ugly. I know I really should be judging on the appearance of a mech for the overall, but it's like they just took like what looks to be like the legs of a Hellbringer or a Summoner and then built an Inner Sphere upper body on top of there. I mean, that's what this thing looks like. I know a lot of the earlier Inner Sphere Omnis are really just designed as ripoffs of the Clan ones, but the Summoner weighs 70 tons and this thing weighs 90 tons. So, yeah, again, it takes more tonnage in the Inner Sphere to do what a Clanner can do for lighter. Although, really, it's not equivalent to a Summoner because it doesn't move at 585. And it doesn't have that typical overall capacity that the Summoner has. This is really more of a slow command mech. The mech... One of the mechs I truly love in this book. I mean, not as much as I love the Bushwacker, because the Bushwacker is just so cool. But this is the DVS-2 Devastator. A 100-ton assault mech mounting 14 double heat sinks. 18.5 tons, so not quite maximum armor. Moves at 3.5, but that movement profile doesn't really matter, because what this thing is armed with is twin Gauss rifles, twin PPCs, a quartet of medium lasers, one which is in the rear. That's fine. We'll accept that today. I mean, I cannot say anything bad about this mech. In fact, the only thing I can say is that this mech is awesome. It's a stellar design. And the biggest issue with it is I can't figure out why the head looks like a pyramid with Mr. Cool sunglasses. Still, it's a wonderful design. I love this thing. It is freaking gorgeous. The next section of mechs we're going to get into are the SLDF designs in this book. I think it's kind of a weird section they have in here because it's got vehicles and mechs all lumped together for this SLDF section. We're just going to talk about the mechs. We'll maybe do the vehicles in a future day. In fact, I am planning on doing some technical readout discussions about vehicles and even battle armor in the future. So look forward to those. We haven't actually touched on any of those yet. But they're things that I quite enjoy having in my campaign games. So, we will be discussing them. But our first SLDF mech is the NTK-2Q Nighthawk. It is a little 35-tonner that moves at 6'9", so it's not super fast. It's got 112 points of armor at 7 tons of Pro-Tech. It's got 12 double heat sinks, which is pretty good because it mounts an ER large and a large laser, which paired up and do 20 points of heat, and a medium pulse laser, which does 4 more points of heat, so 24. So this thing, honestly, is just a little bit heat inefficient because it can't handle its movement speed and fire everything at once. Which is fine because a lot of times you'll not be joining that medium pulse laser with all these other weapons because it won't be in range with only 6 hexes being its maximum distance. Still, I think that this thing is pretty well, it's above average. It's an above average mech for a light. Next up, we have the SPR-5F Spector. This is a little 35-tonner again with 7.5 tons of armor. Moves a 7.11.7, so that's pretty good. Has 11 double heat sinks. Has a large, 2 mediums, and a small laser, so not stellar weaponry, but it does mount a Guardian ECM system, which is pretty darn good. And Guardian ECMs are one of those things that can nullify C3 systems. And I love C3 systems, so obviously I love the counterpart, or the counterattack of C3. You go up against enemy C3, you better have some ECM. It also does a few other things, which is also really useful, but for this discussion, ECM is good against C3, and that's what counts. That's what makes this mech really good, because of its speed. It can get in there, and it can turn off maybe that master computer or whatever, or block that line of sight, or block that communication line. So this is going to be an above-average mech because of that, because of what it can do as a proper harasser. This mech is designed not so much to fight and kill, as it is to break up electronics, which it's good at. Next up is the TLN5W Talon. I stare at the artwork for this thing and I wonder what went wrong. I mean, why are the medium lasers shaped like UFO discs that are attached to the left arm? And are they firing straight downward? Or do they come out of that funny thing that looks like a little digital splatter on the side? I don't get it. I don't understand that. And why is the ERPPC mounted in such a way that it hangs below the arm and more of the gun goes behind the mech than in front of the mech? Okay, well, beyond that. This is our third 35-tonner in a row. This one moves at 812 and has the exact same armor as the Spector. So it's faster, same armor. It mounts an ERPPC and 2 medium lasers, and it has 11 double heat sinks. So that's pretty good. Again, I can't rate this thing. This thing is really... Right now, these mechs are just being very average. Thankfully, they all had different movement profiles, and they all did different jobs in the battlefield. So, they're all uniquely different. At least for 35-tonners, they're not all copy-paste, blah. But, next up, we've got the 50-tonner, the STY-3C Starslayer. This thing at least has Indosteel and double heat sinks. Because if you're lanced at the weaponry, you'd go, huh? It's just like a 3025 mech. It's got a pair of large lasers, an SRM4, a pair of medium lasers, a small laser in the back of it, and case. Thankfully, it has case. Now, overall, it's a 50-tonner that moves 585, so it's a pretty good movement profile on there. And it's got the heat to cover what it can fire. You can't fire everything and move. That's going to be an issue with it. But it's pretty good. It's got a good amount of armor. It's got 9.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor, so it's pretty well protected, honestly. And, yeah, I mean, I actually like the way this one looks for the most part. This is a pretty good piece of artwork. I mean, I'm not so fond of the left arm on it, but the rest of it looks pretty solid. I'm going to put this... Still, the Starslayer is going to go in as an average mech, in my opinion, because it is pretty average. It's got good speed, good armor. Its weaponry is pretty solid, but it's not something to write home about, and it is not quite heat efficient. It's close, but not quite. Next up is the LNX-9Q Lynx, and it's another of those mechs that when I stare at the picture for a long time, I start to go cross-eyed, trying to figure out what I'm looking at. This is a 55-tonner that moves at 585. It's got 12 tons of armor, which makes it really well armored. In fact, I'm looking down this thing, and I am seeing 100% armor. That's pretty sweet. 100% armor is always really nice. It has got an ERPPC, 4 medium lasers, and a large laser. It's got 15 double heat sinks, so it's not going to be heat efficient at all, because it has an Inner Sphere ERPPCs are not heat efficient. In many ways, I prefer the basic PPC over an ERPPC, just because of that 5 extra heat on the ER is just terrible. I know the ERPPCs are popular because they can reach out and touch things at further range. They don't have the minimums that cause an issue with the basic PPC. But at the same time, that extra heat always just irks me. I think if it had been like 13 heat for 10 damage, I probably wouldn't actually complain about them. But at 15, there's 50% more heat, and that just feels like a real burden on that gun. Still, the Lynx is pretty darn good. It's got good speed profile. I mean, if you're not firing one of the heavier weapons, you can pretty much fire all the mediums and the other heavy weapon without too much of a heat burden. But because it has that heat burden, it really just falls into the average category. It's pretty much an average mech. It's got what you expect for speed. It's got what you'd expect for maneuverability. That's why I just said speed maneuverability. It's got good armor. It's got actually 100% armor, which is really fantastic. And it's got weaponry that's slightly too much more than it can handle for heat. So it's pretty average. Next up, the CTS-6Y Cestus. This thing is a 65-tonner that moves at 460 with 12 double heat sinks and 13.5 tons of armor. Again, as I quickly glance down the armor values, it's at 100% armor, which is something that's kind of been popular in this book. It's like some of the designers went, okay, here's the basic systems and the engine, and then maximum armor. I like this mech a lot because it mounts a Gauss rifle paired with 2 larges and 2 mediums, which means that this thing can walk and fire everything. It only generates heat when it runs. That's pretty darn good. Maximum armor, good weaponry. It's got a little bit too much ammo. It's got 24 shots of ammo, which is more than you need to have on a Gauss rifle for most games. 2 tons of ammo is pretty good. 16 rounds of shooting is pretty much all you really need to deal with in most games. Still, I can't pull this mech. This is a above average mech. It's very, very good. The picture drives me a bit nuts. But what else am I going to say about this book? 3058 has lots of artwork that makes me go cross-eyed. Not in a good way either. Now we come to the EXC B2 Excalibur, the mech named after a medieval sword, with what looks like a medieval sword on its arm, but has no melee weapons, nor is it a brawler. This mech upsets me. This mech is actually a giant piece of garbage. This is a 70-ton mech with honestly the same armor that most 35-tonners in this book are carrying. It has the armor of a mech that weigh... It doesn't have any armor for its weight class. It is unarmored. It is bad. And what does it mount? It mounts a Gauss rifle and an LRM-20 system. I like Gauss rifles. I like LRM-20s. I don't like this mech. It moves at 5'8" for a mech that is essentially a range mech again. It could probably done well with a 4.6 and had armor to protect it. And maybe then it could have some point defense weaponry as well. But no, it's a 5'8" range attacker with no defense. And as soon as this thing is done firing its ammo, which is 12 turns of LRM, which is just fine, that's an average battle length, and 16 rounds of Gauss, and 12 of the AMS, you just still go, what is wrong? This is an awful design. This is crap. And I hate it because it's got a great name, and it should be a better mech. And I can't see the Gauss rifle in the thing, because the Gauss rifle is mounted in the arm with the sword protrusion. I can't find the Gauss rifle. Next up, we have the ST-8A Shootist. Not a stellar name. It's a weird looking mech. I mean, I love that one big cannon arm. Boom, 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 boom. But still. It's weird. It's a 70-tonner again with the moves at 4.6 with 13 double heat sinks. Has an AC-20 and ER large, 2 medium pulse lasers. And it is almost maximum armor. It's not quite. It's just a few points off of maximum armor. So it's really darn close. Which means it's probably a pretty efficient 12 tons of armor. And I think they're ferrofibrous, so it's actually really good. This thing is an interesting mech. It is almost heat efficient, not quite, but it's pretty solid. And it's no XL engine, which means it's going to be durable on the battlefield. In general, it's a pretty good mech. I like it. I think this is, though... It feels kind of average to me, doesn't it? It feels just a bit average. It really excels at the 6 hex range of combat. Only has 10 shells to that AC-20 also, which could be pretty limiting on the battlefield. But you have to close in. I think the Shootist is a pretty average mech. I'm not going to say don't take it. Obviously, it's good enough. It's not bad, but it's not good either, really. It's average. Okay, next up is the SPT into Spartan. This is an 80-tonner with a 5'8" movement profile, which means it has an XL engine, because if it didn't have an XL engine, it would be like a Charger, Mr. 5 flashlights. 13 double heat sinks, and it is a touch under-armored, because it's got weaponry still. And more than a quarter of its mass is taken up by an engine. It has an ER-PPC, 3 medium pulse lasers, 2 straight 2s, an AMS, and a tag. That means it can fight. It's not terrible on the heat. It's not great on the heat, but it's not terrible on the heat. I mean, it generates a little bit extra heat when you fire all of your weapons, and if both the streaks lock. So it's not super great for there. But it's still not bad overall. It's kind of cool in the fact that it's an 80-tonner that moves 5'8", so you can give there for some good solid kicks to go along with these pulse weapons, because these pulse weapons have a 6x range. So it pairs up well with physical attacking. But overall, I like it. I think it's an average mech. I mean, I'm almost tempted to rate it a bit higher, but it's pretty average. just because the heat inefficiency combined with the fact that it's a little bit under-armored. And also the offensive capabilities of it are not super stellar, but they're good enough. Next up is the STC-2C Striker. This is an 80-tonner that doesn't belong in this era. It has no Indosteel, no XL, no double heat sinks, no ferrofibrous, no advanced technology on this thing at all. Mounting a PPC large laser, AC5, and 3 medium lasers for an 80-tonner. Honestly, seems like it's a little bit undergunned. It's not heat efficient at all because it only mounts 15 single heat sinks, so the PPC and the large laser are already costing you 3 points of waste heat. It's not a stellar mech. It has less armor than the Spartan. It moves slower. It's the wrong era. This mech doesn't belong here. It belongs there. And considering that the background was it was developed in 2867, yeah, it's in the wrong book. Except for this is the SLDF section. Still, I'm going to put it in the doesn't belong category. Next up is the EMP-6A Emperor. It's a 90-tonner that moves 353 with 12 double heat sinks and a massive 17.5 tons of armor, which once again gives this thing 100% armor coverage. Again, like I said, a lot of mechs went beep, add all armor. Carries 2 LB-10Xs, each with 2 tons of ammo, so they can swap in between shell and cluster. It's got 2 large lasers, 2 medium pulse lasers, and a medium laser. It's a pretty darn good mech, actually. My biggest issue with it is the way it looks, again. I don't understand why the LBX cannons are the same size as the cockpit. That means those LBXs are essentially firing what's the size of essentially like a Honda Civic every time they fire their shells. I mean, those cockpits are not, they're nicely sized. You're firing, well, maybe like a Harley Davidson then, I mean, which is a little bit just weird. And then in addition to that, the large lasers are the tiny hole above the gigantic, massive motorcycle shelling cannons. Another artwork we've seen medium laser with like weapons that are like with like apertures as big as a cockpit glass. You know, I mean, inconsistency. It just drives me nuts in the artwork for this book. But the mech is pretty darn good. I'm gonna say this mech is above average. The Emperor is above average. Spoiler alert: the next 3 mechs are all going to go into the stellar category. They are all insane, awesome, top-notch, top-tier mechs. They all weigh 95 tons or more. They're all assault mechs mounting at least a pair of Gauss rifles also, which is why they freaking rock. The first up in this trio of deadly mechs, or whatever, I don't know where it's going with that, is the NSR-9J Nightstar. This thing is a 3.5 mech with, again, 100% armor coverage, and 14 double heat sinks, which are perfect to go with its twin Gauss rifles, ER-PPC, 2 medium pulse lasers, and a small laser. The only issue this mech has is that it is a bit over-ammoed. It carries 28 shells of Gauss rifle ammunition per cannon. That is a lot of excess ammo. Remember, most games only last about 12 to 16 turns, roughly. This thing can fight for like 3 games without worrying about ammo. It's crazy how much ammo this thing carries. I mean, the benefit of that, I guess, is that if you get hit in those crit slots, you can just take ammo from all over the mech. It's like, oh no, you hit one of my tons of Gauss ammo. I only lost 7 shells. Da, 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 da. And you wasted your crit because it didn't do anything. Still, this thing is an amazing mech. It also looks cool. The new model for this mech is just fantastic. Yay! And it's a monster. It's a super monster in the field. So is the next one up. The PLG 3Z Pillager. A 353 mech with 14 double heat sinks, 100 tons, and 307 points of armor at 19.5 maximum armor on this sucker. This is a mech ready to make things dead. It has 2 Gauss rifles, 4 medium lasers, and a large laser. It carries 24 shells of Gauss ammo per cannon, so not quite as insanely over-ammoed, but still over-ammoed. The fun thing about this mech is the art. This one I like the art of. I would love to see this one redone in the new Catalyst things with that awesome skull face and those claws it's got on the hands. Ooh, it'd be so nice. Still, this is a really solid mech. That jumping ability on this thing gives it a little bit extra flexibility, making it even more awesome. So yeah, here's another twin Gauss Rifle murder monster machine. Even the down-tech versions that you can find like in the early, like in Intro Tech era that has 2 AC-20s is still a pretty effective, scary monster on the battlefield. This one, though, is good. This is really good. I love the Pillager. Please update it in the new Catalyst stuff, please. And our last one is one of the scariest mechs in the entire book. The TDK 7X Thunder Hawk. Yes, I believe you need to say the name properly as Thunder Hawk. This is a 100-ton mech with, again, 19.5 or 307 points of maximal armor. This thing mounts a trio of Gauss rifles and a quartet of medium lasers. It has 24 shots per Gauss rifle again. Or no, only 16 per Gauss rifle because that's 3 Gauss rifles. So, it's well ammoed, it's well appointed, it moves at 3.5, it only has 10 single heat sinks, which actually makes it kind of silly because they could have been doubles and been just fine. But they've only got 10 singles. It means it can't fire all the medium lasers and the Gauss rifles without generating some heat. But really, this thing should be getting into the same range. It needs to pull those medium lasers into combat effectiveness because it's got 3 Gauss rifles. Anything that's in short range of this thing is going to die to Gauss shelling anyways. Or at long range, I mean, this thing is just scary. You find yourself a nice hilltop with some partial cover in front of you, and you just go boom, 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 boom. You just throw Gauss rifle shells downfield all day long until things start getting knocked off the map. This is an amazing mech. And yes, we're going to end with our third of our deadly trio. The TDK 7X Thunderhawk is an awesome, awesome mech. It is stellar in all ways, shape, and form. And that is all the Inner Sphere Mechs out of Technical Readout 3058. We'll of course be revisiting this technical readout when we do the clan mechs, and hopefully the armor, and maybe even the battle armor. So look forward to those videos in the future. For now, I relatively like this book. In general, the mech designs are very positive in this book. There's a good selection of stellar mechs, including a nice medium one, which I'm very happy with. I love that Blackjack, honestly. And there weren't too many designs that were truly disappointing. There are only 2 designs that actually make me think, really? Nah. Now, of course, there are those 4 designs I look at and go, you're kind of in the wrong place. I mean, again, they almost should have like collected a whole bunch of earlier designs and said, like, you know, this is 3025 Mechs Part 2 or something like that, but they didn't. And, yeah, it's nice to see the first Inner Sphere Omnis as well. A lot of them are pretty good mechs. Some of them are a little bit lacking, and one of them is truly awful, in my opinion. But still, hooray, Inner Sphere Omnis. This is the first wave of them. We will be getting more in the future. And some of them, spoiler, the Hauptmann, the Templar, are really freaking good. But for now, we've seen the start of the Inner Sphere adapting clan technology, or at least the idea behind clan technology. It won't be until we get to later eras when they start mixing in things like clan weaponry, which actually makes the game very interesting and very strange. You know what? We've come to the end of this video, so you know what to do. You do the YouTube things. If you've enjoyed this video and you hope to see more of them, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and of course leave a comment below. We're always open to discussion about how I rank my mechs or how you might rank the mechs. In addition to that, I will have a link to this tier list template in the description below, so you can go fill it out yourself and see how you feel about these mechs. Well, I've asked you to do the YouTube things, so I'm gonna say sayonara. This is SleeplessRonin saying, we'll see you next time.